All right, well, here we go. Let me just make sure I've got the right microphone on. I don't know how to do that. Well, anyway, I watched a video tutorial that said I could somehow add a Q&A to this, so I'm going to figure out how to do that. Oh dear. Ah, there we go. All right. So I should have questions set up now. And by the way, Claudio's in my lap right now. So if you've ever wanted to see Claudio, here he is. What else have we got going on here? I have never done this before, so I'm a little slow on all the features. It's Claudio with a U, not a W. He is named after Claudio Monteverdi, the Italian late Renaissance, early Baroque composer. Both of my cats have names like that. So y'all can see that the Q&A thing is open, right? Okay, so there is another cat. The other cat is named Callisto. She is extremely shy and she does not like being picked up. So I'm not sure I'll be able to show her off. But she might come by the chair to demand some petting. So if you do have questions, because this is a Q&A, feel free to drop one in that Q&A box so that I can keep track of them and answer them. Because that will make things easier for me. Because already I'm having a bit of a hard time keeping track of the live chat, which is a little chaotic. Go to channel. Nope, that's not what I want to do. Oh, okay. So there's a ton of questions already. All right. So first off, I absolutely can do more book readings. I plan on doing more book readings. I am super busy right now at this stage of my PhD process. I'm in the middle of something called comprehensive exams, which basically involves reading a couple hundred books over the span of a year and then taking a few sort of big written exams where you write like 30 pages of essays in 8 hours, 4 times in a week, and then oral exams. And this has sort of got me on a 6-day work week. But Saturdays, I plan on continuing to read and upload chapters. I know that's a little slower than it was during the pandemic, but of course, a lot is different from the pandemic. All right. Yeah. So my process has evolved since I started doing these. It started off with me just recording in one take on my iPhone, which is the part of the reason why book one is so full of errors. But ever since I got this real microphone, and I'm not sure if I'm streaming through this real microphone or not. YouTube does not have the most intuitive system for determining that. But ever since I got this and started recording on Audacity, which is a free audio editing software, I've been able to refine the process a bit. So what I do now is typically read or reread the chapter to myself, speak all the dialogue parts as I read them to sort of prepare and get ready and remember how the voices go and remember how to deliver and pick how to deliver the lines, and then record the chapter all the way through. I now pause if there are noticeable errors and re-record the lines to try and fix errors, but I did not used to do that. What else? So, general tips on voice acting. I feel a little hesitant to answer this question because I am not in any capacity a professional, but I've gotten this question a few times from people who play Dungeons and Dragons, who want to be able to DM for their friends and do a good job, immerse them and stuff. So I have a couple thoughts from my incredibly amateur perspective, which is, and this is partially based off of things I've seen from friends and acquaintances of mine who are actors, who are like professionally trained actors, opera singers, and stuff. So one thing with voice acting, with making a voice for a character, is having like a bit, weird specific ways that they say or pronounce specific words that make them distinct. There are, let me think of some examples from the audiobooks. So like when I voice Tywin Lannister, which is, I'll happily admit, just like basically a Charles Dance impression from the show because he's so iconic and so great in the role. The way he pronounces the word Tyrion, he always pronounces it the same way, in a really sort of harsh, clipped sort of Tyrion, like percussive, fast, rapid, expressing his sort of disdain and displeasure at interacting with his son. And things like that, if you have a couple of them for any sort of like character you're trying to do, I find that they give them a sort of distinctiveness and maybe like reality that certainly like around a DVD or DND table, people I think will respond to. Another example is like in the chapter when Dany goes to Astapor, I did an extremely exaggerated voice for wait. Oh my God, I forget his name. Those Giscari names are difficult to remember. But the good master or the wise master or the kind master or whatever it is who's showing Dany around the Unsullied, I always had him pronounce the word Unsullied in a specifically unctuous, disgusting, unpleasant way. Unsullied and things like that. I think that would be my biggest tip for voice acting. Also, do not be afraid to just do impressions. Like a big chunk of the voices that I do are impressions of other fictional characters, of actors, some from the show, some not. And I find that that's really good grounding for coming up with a character voice. So I'm going to go on to another question now. You guys are asking a bunch of them, which I love. So why I started doing these audiobooks. So the reason why I started was late in the run of Game of Thrones. I think those of us who watched it realized that things were going really wrong. Really wrong. and at a really precipitous sort of rate. I had sort of been down on the show since like season 3, really not enjoying it, but everybody was starting to see things my way by the time. I guess I shouldn't spoil anything, but by the time things started getting really stupid, people could tell they were getting really stupid. So I was begging my friends to read the books because they're my favorite fantasy series. I really love them, and I didn't want them to think that the thing I really loved was as stupid as what was on TV. But my friends are busy; they don't have a ton of time. And one of them said, sort of as a joke, "Listen, David, if you record audiobooks of them, I'll listen to them and read the books that way." This was years and years ago. And I started doing them. And it was amusing for me, and my friend was listening. And then the pandemic hit. It was April, I think, of 2020. I'm holed up in my apartment, just me and the cats. I was bored. I was lonely. I mean, the cats are great company, but they're not people. They're cats. And I wanted something to do, so I started uploading them to YouTube. And as I've said before, like I really never could have guessed that there would be an audience, much less an enthusiastic audience, much less a, at this point, like kind of large audience for those books. But that is how I got started. Oh, this is a question I'd like to answer. Lannister or Stark? So I think this is a interesting question. It's interesting because I sort of have a hard time answering it. Somebody else asked when I was like fishing for comment Q&A questions before I realized that was sort of unmanageable. Somebody asked me, and they might be down here in the questions, of which there are quite a few. They might still be here, but they asked who my top 5 Targaryen kings were, and I think my answer for that is kind of similar to my answer for Lannister or Stark, and I think it is revealing of how I view and think about the series. I don't have top 5 Lannister kings, and I don't really have a preference between Lannister and Stark because at the end of the day, they're all bad. I know that George R.R. Martin wrote Jaehaerys the Conciliator as being like the sort of platonic ideal of a good king, but there's no such thing as a good king. There's no such thing as a good feudal aristocratic house. All of these people are rich and powerful because they extract the product of peasants' labor with violence. And I think that that is a really important thing to bear in mind when thinking about A Song of Ice and Fire, which has a sort of contradictory relationship to this reality. On the one hand, it fully acknowledges it. All of the depiction of war, the depiction of sort of mundane injustice day to day in Westeros, it all reinforces this idea there's no good kings, there's no good lords. But George is also attracted to noble lords and heroes and prophesied heroes and chosen ones and people with great destinies. And I think one of the things that's so interesting about the series is how it exists right in the middle of all of those webs of contradiction and difficulty to tease them out. Like, do we root for Daenerys? On the one hand, Daenerys is unequivocally changing the world for the better. She's smashing a hideously cruel slavery industry. She's trying to bring freedom to the people. She's trying to end oppression. And I think that this is really relevant for the idea of like Daenerys having a dark turn later. But Daenerys can't get over the idea that she should rule a continent because her blood is special. because her dad's blood was special, and so on and so on and so on. And the idea of ending oppression and helping the people and also ruling over a continent because your blood is special, those are ideas that don't work together. They're contradictory. And I think that what's going to happen with Daenerys, and I bet it's going to happen in The Winds of Winter if that ever gets released, is those tensions are going to come to a head. By the end of A Dance with Dragons, she's already given up basically on the idea of planting trees, which she mentions over and over and over and over again. Dragons don't plant trees, they burn things. Or when Victarion asks Euron, what do dragons make? He says, whoa. And embracing the dragon is also embracing her destiny as rightful queen. And it's going to be horrible for everybody. But ultimately, I do have an answer to Lannister or Stark. I like the Lannisters. I mean, they're just so fun. The characters are just great. Cersei and Jaime are two of my top 5 POV characters. Tywin's a fantastic character. Kevon's a fantastic character. Davin Lannister's awesome. Jenna Lannister is awesome. They're just really fun to hang out with. All right, so moving on. So, how old am I? I'm 31 years old. And would I consider doing audiobooks for a living? You've got a great voice. Well, thank you. I don't think so. I have a sort of plan for what I want to do with my life, and that's to be a history professor. That's why I'm working on a history PhD right now. I love studying history. I love teaching history. And while I love doing these audiobooks, part of why I love doing them is they're not a job. They're not something where I have to wake up every day and do them. And I think that that's also part of the reason why I have never monetized my channel. I don't want to do that because then it turns the channel into work rather than something fun that I like doing. I'm very flattered that so many of you think I could do this professionally, but also I know a tiny bit about what life is like for professional performers. And it's it's a difficult way to live. You're very dependent on working gig to gig to gig to gig. And that sort of instability is not really something I want in my life. I love doing these audiobooks, but you have to be really driven and really passionate, and so passionate that the sort of grind doesn't wear you down if you want to do this sort of thing professionally. So I do not think that that is something that I will be pursuing. Moving on. Any wins predictions? So you've really got me acting like like one of these A Song of Ice and Fire YouTubers now, if I wasn't enough. So I did predict, yeah, Dany's going to do some horrible things. She's going to roast young Griff without a doubt to me. I think that Winds will be the book where she gets to Westeros. And I think that as Winds concludes, Dany will have done horrible, horrible things to claim the birthright that was denied her. That is why young Griff is in the story. He's there so that he can unite with Dorne. I guess this is also a prediction. He's going to unite with Dorne. He's going to take King's Landing easily. Cersei is going to do something horrible to get out of her trial with the Faith. Something so hideous and offensive and against all norms of decency, even the ones that are very flexible for the aristocracy. that the people will despise her and they'll welcome young Griff as a liberator. As Tyrion says to young Griff in A Dance with Dragons, he says, Westeros is bleeding and Cersei is binding the wounds with salt. And that's going to come to a head as young Griff just sort of coasts to victory. But I also think he's going to marry Arianne Martell to secure an alliance with Dorne, something that he probably doesn't have to do at the end of the day, but will seem wise in the moment. And so when Dany shows up with young Griff on the throne, she's just going to see another usurper. She's not going to believe this crap about Varys swapped the kid at the last second. I mean, that story doesn't make any sense. It certainly isn't going to make any sense to somebody with a vested interest in not believing it. And young Griff is going to die horribly. Young Griff, who's a nice guy, who's the perfect prince, but he stole Dany's throne and he's going to die horribly. I also think, and this I believe I stole from poor Quentin, who is a really good writer on A Song of Ice and Fire. I think he has a podcast. He has or used to have a Tumblr called Poor Quentin. He's written some of the better essays on A Song of Ice and Fire. So I'm stealing this from him. But I do think that that little horn that Sam found at the Fist of the First Men is the Horn of Winter. I think Euron's going to blow it towards the end of the Winds of Winter. Or, I don't know, in the middle of it. I can't make predictions about pacing. That's a fool's errand. And somehow Euron's going to get his hands on that horn, and he is going to knock down the wall. What else do I think is going to happen in Winds? I think the Night Lamp theory is true, but I don't think Wyman Manderley is going to make his way out okay. George is not somebody who rewards seeking revenge, and he's not somebody who likes revenge or wants us to celebrate revenge. Here's Claudio again. So I think that is... Maybe Stannis will kill him. Maybe he'll die in the fight. But I do think Stannis is going to win. Oh, I also think... I know I said I wasn't going to spoil the show. What's the point? I do think that, the show depicts Stannis burning Shireen alive as a sacrifice. And a lot of people were disgusted and horrified by that as an adaptation choice. They thought it was another example of Benioff and Weiss hating Stannis and just making him do something completely out of character because they hate Stannis. And they did make him do something completely out of character, at least for book Stannis, of having him murder his own daughter in the name of winning a stupid battle against another guy. I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think it's going to happen when Stannis thinks it's his only way to stop the others. Maybe after the wall falls. Maybe when all hope seems lost, he realizes he needs the power of King's blood to halt their advance, and he makes the ultimate sacrifice of his kid. But it's not going to work. I don't really know exactly what theme that will serve, but it will be sort of the thing that ultimately dooms Stannis. I don't know whether George will give him a heroic end, but he's not making it to the end. I mean, you can't get much more literal with prophecies and prophetic visions in A Song of Ice and Fire than wearing a crown that's burning your head. So I don't think he's going to make it out. But I think that's all I've got off the top of my head for Winds predictions. I'll think about this more, maybe get back to that later on. So I've gotten a lot of questions like this about collaborating with, interacting with, doing things with other big A Song of Ice and Fire YouTube people. I'm not super familiar with all of them because, as I think I mentioned in one of the community posts, I don't actually spend that much time on YouTube, which is not a knock against people who do. It's just not something I spend my time doing. I watch a lot of like classical music score videos and Also watch some really bad cooking videos. I don't know. There's so much cooking influencer crap out there now, and I watch all of it, and I don't like any of it, which is, I guess that's a lot of my interaction with online content. But anyway, um, yeah, like I don't think I'm gonna make any moves to really make this happen. I mean, it seems like they've got their own things going on, and I've got my own thing going on. Somebody asked about Preston Jacobs writing fan fiction of The Winds of Winter, like his predictions for it, and somebody asked if I would like read some of those chapters, and I don't really want to do that unless he wants somebody to do that. It might be fun if he's like looking for somebody to read those chapters to like throw my hat in the ring. But it's also like it's his work. It's not a mega best-selling novel series whose author, goes to bed on a huge pile of money. It's his stuff, and I wouldn't want to like horn in, and I wouldn't want it to be the case where like his material is something that you could watch on my channel, if that makes sense. It just seems like poor form and like not very polite to do. All right, I'm gonna scroll through the questions here. This is an important one. Do I have any plans to do Fire and Blood? No, I don't. This is part of the whole it's a hobby thing for me. I don't really like Fire and Blood. And listen, I defend George R. R. Martin's writing from almost all critics. I'm so happy to go to bat for any number of things that people often attack. But I really don't like Fire and Blood. And this is not a knock on George, who I'm pretty sure didn't write that much of it, but there are a few things that I think George is really masterful at as a story writer, or as a writer, as a storyteller. I think characterization, he's really, really good at. Dialogue, he's really good at. Like any of his books, if you read them, and I've read a bunch of his non A Song of Ice and Fire things. Amazing dialogue. Also, similarly, atmosphere. He is so good at setting a mood, making you just really feel the overwhelming sense of a scene. And horror. He is an amazing horror writer. If you've ever read some of his like sci-fi horror, like Sand Kings, or vampire horror, like Fever Dream, he's so good at it. He can really make you feel the dread and and none of those are really reflected in Fire and Blood. I don't the sort of dry tone of it doesn't really work for me. It doesn't set an atmosphere, create a mood, make me really care. I find the dialogue to be very weak. I mean, I know that it's supposed to be like excerpts, which only like blunts the impact, but actually, well, I've got my Kindle browser reader on me. So let me find a passage that I remember just not liking. This is maybe not fair, but let's see. Yeah, all right. So here is this is a chapter on this is the chapter Heirs of the Dragon, A Question of Succession, talking about Jaehaerys the First choosing an heir out of his choices. So here it's after it's explained that he has chosen a male successor, or prefers a male successor. The most prominent dissenter was good Queen Alysanne, who had helped her husband rule the Seven Kingdoms for many years, and now saw her son's daughter being passed over because of her sex. A ruler needs a good head and a true heart, she famously told the king. A cock is not essential. If your grace truly believes that women lack the wit to rule, plainly you have no further need of me. And thus Queen Alysanne departed King's Landing and flew to Dragonstone on her dragon Silverwing. She and King Jaehaerys remained apart for 2 years, the period of estrangement recorded in the histories as the Second Quarrel. That just does not work for me. It sounds very Game of Thrones kind of dialogue where they talk about cocks a lot. And I find that the whole book is like that. And honestly, I think that also George really gives into some of his worst instincts in terms of like writing about women and sexual violence in it. It's just all very pornographic in a way that the series isn't. And so I just do not like Fire and Blood. I'm sorry that I just spent, I don't know, 40 minutes shitting on Fire and Blood if you really like it, but that's just my personal, take on it. So moving on, favorite character. Okay, so I have 5 favorite POV characters. Feels appropriate to have a top 5. I don't know. Number 1 is Cersei. I really love Cersei. She is such a great depiction of what it's like to be in the mind of somebody who is very evil, because being evil sucks. Like, people like Cersei are not happy. They are not, they're not able to sort of glory in their malevolence like you might see a more traditional fantasy villain doing, like you might see Euron doing, for example. Because when you're an actual human, living that kind of way makes you miserable. And I feel like her POVs capture that so well. And I also feel like George is sort of really in his element when dealing with her characterization. I think the scene at Tywin's funeral, where her feelings are just constantly lurching from admiration to hatred to love to envy to all sorts of different things. And she's not even aware that she's shifting, but we are, because of how skillfully George is depicting what reads like a very realistic sort of internal monologue. Number 2 is Theon. I love Theon. I loved him since I got to his Clash of Kings POV the first time I was reading and was like, this guy sucks. Because he really does suck. But George is great at writing people who suck and making them believable. And Theon in A Clash of Kings is very believably weak. He's a weak person, and weak people can end up doing really terrible things like he does. And then he disappears for 2 full books. And when you get to that first Reek chapter, I just remember that landed like the red wedding for me, realizing what had happened and who Reek was. And then him clawing his way back to a sense of self, to knowing who he is, to claiming his identity, is so affecting and beautiful, and such like a good, I don't even know if it's a redemption story, but it sort of is. I mean, Ramsay is a very sort of classically satanic character in that when he appears in disguise as Reek, he tempts Theon to do all sorts of horrible things, and then he reveals himself and punishes him for them. But beyond all measure of justice or decency, he punishes him for his own sick kicks. Which also is another thing I love about the Theon chapters in A Dance with Dragons, is they make the North very gothic. A Dance with Dragons is full of reminders of how fucked up the North is, which I really like a lot. It's just a reminder that, these are people who sacrificed folks to trees for a long time. These are people who still practice the rite of first night. These are people who are real comfortable with violence and cruelty. And all of the sort of vision of the North from A Game of Thrones, of these sort of hard, intense, maybe cold, but virtuous, decent, honest folk, is sort of smashed by A Dance with Dragons and reveals a much sort of darker place north of the neck. And I really like that. Number 3 is Sansa. I really love Sansa's POVs. And I think I saw somebody asking about how I feel about like haters. I think that there is a lot of disproportionate anger and hatred directed at female characters in A Song of Ice and Fire. I don't want to accuse anyone of anything, but I can't help but notice it. Female characters make mistakes just like male characters. Female characters have unsympathetic traits just like male characters. And they seem to get treated harshly for it if they are conventionally feminine. Asha and Brienne don't usually get this treatment. Sansa's awesome because she is so real. First, as a spoiled, like teenage girl, young teenage girl who doesn't know anything about the world, who's immensely privileged, who's privileged to the point of sort of thoughtlessness and sometimes casual cruelty. And that's all depicted in such a real way. But also, once Ned's dead and she's trapped in King's Landing, we start to see like these sort of core heroic traits in her, a sort of unquenchable kindness and decency and desire to help and comfort others, while at the same time she's learning how to navigate danger and also learning who's sort of worth that kindness and who isn't. She's learning not to be naive. And seeing King's Landing filtered through her increasingly like knowing eyes is, I think, like a really cool way of telling the story. And like her interactions with Littlefinger up in the Vale are just awesome. Like seeing her really learn how to play the game is really thrilling for me reading these books. So number 4, Jaime. I mean, come on, everyone loves Jaime. You can't not love Jaime. I mean, he pushed a kid out a window. No, that's not why I love him. I mean, Jaime's just a fantastic redemption arc. He is a great character. His POVs are very like funny and witty. He shares that with Tyrion, but the sort of emotional heart of his story is just so powerful and affecting and beautiful that like the best thing he ever did in his life is what everybody hates him for. Before he did the best thing in his life, everybody admired him for bullshit reasons because he was handsome and he was good at violence. That's nothing to build a sense of self on. You build a very weak sense of self that way, because if you're not handsome anymore or if you're not good at violence anymore, then what do you have? And Jaime has to ask himself that when his hand gets cut off. And it's so compelling watching him slowly, inconsistently try to be a better person. And the fact that he is smart enough to sort of see through so much of the stuff that's going on around him also makes him very appealing in a similar way to Tyrion. I think that he actually parallels Catelyn's arc in a lot of ways. I think there's a reason why that famous monologue he gives in A Clash of Kings about vows, so many vows, they make you swear and swear, that thing. I think there's a reason why he says that to Catelyn, because Catelyn's actually also caught in all of those contradictions. For Catelyn, it's like you have to be a good mother, but you have to be a good vassal. You have to be a good wife. Those 3 things aren't always the same behavior. You have to be loyal to who? The king? Your son who's the king? Your daughters? What about your husband? You know, whatever Catelyn tries to do, she's trying to live up to that idea of family, duty, honor, but she always finds herself caught in this impossible knot of contradictory expectations and desires. And Jaime's the same way. And I think they work really great as like foils and parallels for each other and are similarly interesting. I think I said why I like Catelyn. Though she's not the 5 spot on my POV list goes to Brienne. I really like Brienne as a character. She has great sort of like depths to her, despite her sort of like her seemingly simple exterior, but I really like the way her chapters give us a tour of the country after the war is over and things need to be cleaned up. I think it's really important for the series that it sort of rubs our noses in that sort of thing, in the destruction, in the mayhem, in the violence, in the suffering, in the random innocent people who end up on the wrong side of things, even on Frey and Lannister soldiers who end up getting hanged for basically making the wrong choice of what village to be born in. Brienne's chapters give us an in to all of those things, and I think they're really awesome for that. So also, I mean, it's got the Septon Maribald monologue, which is really awesome. And yeah, so those are my top 5 POV characters. All right, I'm gonna scroll through the question. What the? I'd like to apologize to the disembodied voice community if you don't like a face reveal. You can minimize the window or perhaps just listen to my audiobooks. So thank you for that question. I think that's a very important one. Wait, hold on, I'm scrolling. Can you read a little bit of A Song of Ice and Fire? I guess I could. Y'all want to hear that? Okay. Any requests? I'm looking at the live chat now. All right. It's looking like the Broken Man monologue by Septon Maribald, who is, of course, one of my favorite characters. Yeah, let me pull that up. I've been reading all of these off of Kindle editions, just so you know. Oh, by the way, I do have a hard copy of A Feast for Crows that was a gift from my friend Brendan, who is like the greatest gift giver I know. Like every time I receive a gift from him, it shames me because I suck at giving gifts and I'm forgetful. Like I don't remember the holidays. Anyway, he got me like a hardcover signed by George R.R. Martin. Incredible gift. All right. So let me find it. I'm just going to, keyword search Broken Man because that is pretty easy. Now, bear in mind, this is live, so no promises on not making any errors, but here we go. Back on the road, the Septon said, "We would do well to keep a watch tonight, my friends. The villagers say they've seen 3 broken men skulking round the dunes west of the old watchtower." "Only 3?" Sir Hyle smiled. "3 is honey to our swords, wench. They're not like to trouble armed men." "Unless they're starving," the Septon said. "There is food in these marshes, but only for those with the eyes to find it. And these men are strangers here, survivors from some battle. If they should accost us, sir, I beg you, leave them to me." "What will you do with them?" "Feed them, ask them to confess their sins so that I might forgive them. Invite them to come with us to the Quiet Isle." "That's as good as inviting them to slit our throats as we sleep," Hyle Hunt replied. Lord Randall has a better ways to deal with broken men. Steel and hempen rope. Sir, my lady, said Podrick, is a broken man an outlaw? More or less, Brienne answered. Septon Maribald disagreed. More or less than more. There are many sorts of outlaws, just as there are many sorts of birds. A sandpiper and a sea eagle both have wings, but they are not the same. The singers love to sing of good men forced to go outside the law to fight some wicked lord, but most outlaws are more like this ravening hound than they are the lightning lord. They are evil men, driven by greed, soured by malice, despising the gods and caring only for themselves. Broken men are more deserving of our pity, though they may be just as dangerous. Almost all are common born, simple folk who had never had more than a mile from the house where they were born until the day some lord came round to take them off to war. Poorly shod and poorly clad, they march away beneath his banners, ofttimes with no better arms than a sickle or a sharpened hoe, or a maul they made themselves by lashing a stone to a stick with strips of hide. Brothers march with brothers, sons with fathers, friends with friends. They've heard the songs and stories, so they go off with eager hearts, dreaming of the wonders they will see, of the wealth and glory they will win. War seems a fine adventure, the greatest most of them will ever know. Then they get a taste of battle. For some, that one taste is enough to break them. Others go on for years, until they lose count of all the battles they have fought in. But even a man who has survived 100 fights can break in his 101st. Brothers watch their brothers die. Fathers lose their sons. Friends see their friends trying to hold their entrails in after they've been gutted by an axe. They see the lord who led them there cut down, and some other lord shouts that they are his now. They take a wound, and when that's still half healed, they take another. There's never enough to eat. Their shoes fall to pieces from the marching. Their clothes are torn and rotten, and half of them are shitting in their breeches from drinking bad water. If they want new boots, or a warmer cloak, or maybe a rusted iron half-helm, they need to take them from a corpse. And before long, they are stealing from the living, too. From the small folk whose lands they're fighting in. Men very like the men they used to be. They slaughter their sheep and steal their chickens. And from there, it's just a short step to carrying off their daughters, too. And one day they look around and realize all their friends and kin are gone, that they are fighting beside strangers beneath a banner that they hardly recognize. They don't know where they are or how to get back home, and the lord they're fighting for does not know their names. Yet here he comes, shouting for them to form up, to make a line with their spears and scythes and sharpened hoes, to stand their ground. And the knights come down on them, faceless men clad all in steel, and the iron thunder of their charge seems to fill the world. And the man breaks. He turns and runs, or crawls off afterward over the corpses of the slain, or steals away in the black of night, and he finds some place to hide. All thought of home is gone by then, and kings and lords and gods mean less to him than a haunch of spoiled meat that will let him live another day, or a skin of bad wine that might drown his fear for a few hours. The broken man lives from day to day, from meal to meal, more beast than man. Lady Brienne is not wrong. In times like these, the traveler must beware of broken men and fear them, but he should pity them as well. When Maribald was finished, a profound silence fell upon their little band. Brienne could hear the wind rustling through a clump of pussy willows, and farther off the cry of a loon. She could hear Dog panting softly as he loped along beside the Septon and his donkey, tongue lolling from his mouth. The quiet stretched and stretched until finally she said, "How old were you when they marched you off to war?" "Why, no older than your boy," Maribald replied. "Too young for such in truth. But my brothers were all going, and I would not be left behind. William said I could be his squire, though Will was no knight, only a pot boy armed with a kitchen knife he'd stolen from the inn. He died upon the stepstones, and never struck a blow. It was fever did for him, and for my brother Robin. Owen died from a mace that split his head apart, and his friend John Pox was hanged for rape." "The War of the Ninepenny Kings?" asked Hyle Hunt. "So they called it, though I never saw a king, nor earned a penny. It was a war, though, that it was." So that's the end of that chapter. It's so good. Man, I haven't thought about that chapter in a while. It's just so beautiful. Like, it's the whole thesis of the series right there. That was a great suggestion for something to read. All right. So I'm going back to the questions tab. I see that you're all very active in the live chat, but I'm not really keeping up with it. So forgive me for that because I've got a big queue of questions. What is going on here? This is a Song of Ice and Fire question, but it's one that I am happy to answer. So what period of history am I specializing in? So I study the 19th century United States, the 1800s, in the American South before the Civil War and the American West after the Civil War. I'm writing a dissertation that is a biography on an individual named Harry St. John Dixon, who was born to wealthy slaveholding parents in the heart of cotton country in Mississippi in 1843 and died in California in 1898. I'm interested in his life intersects with a lot of topics that I'm really interested in. I'm interested in the history of slavery. I am interested in also the political history of Reconstruction. I'm really interested in gender, in particularly the history of masculinity. That is, so there is the idea of biological sex, male, female, but then outside of that, you have the categories of man and woman. And male and female, it can't really change because it's biological. But the notion of what a man is and what a woman is historical. That is, it changes over time. So, like in medieval Europe, in real medieval Europe, they thought that women were lower on what's called the great chain of being than men. The great chain of being is the hierarchical ordering of the universe from the lowliest creature all the way up to God. Women are all lower than men. And as a result, women are physically inferior, they're weaker, their bodies are more prone to disease, they're also more sinful, they're also more lustful. That is, they're way more interested in sex than men. That's the medieval idea of gender. When you get to the 19th century, the notion of the vision of what a woman is changes dramatically. Women are homemakers. They are natural mothers. They are naturally kinder, more pious, less sinful, more gentle than men, and way less interested in sex. That's just one of those sort of really dramatic transitions in how people view like the nature and role of men and women historically. I study something a little smaller, a little more subtle, in studying a specific kind of masculinity in the United States in the 1800s. I'm interested in what kind of man slavery produced, both from the perspective of enslaved laborers themselves and from the perspective of their owners. Because I think that people's attitudes towards men and women and what they are and how they should relate to each other is inseparable from how the economy operates. That is, how people work, how commodities get produced, how profits get made. Slavery is a really stark, dramatic thing where productivity is linked to the brutal, violent exploitation, torture of people who are working against their will. And I think that that created very weird and unique sort of gender norms. This is all sort of relevant to current scholarship, which is interested in re-examining the question of how distinctive slaveholder culture was in the 19th century. I won't bore you all with those details, but my biography is sort of partially about tracking masculinity from somebody groomed to be a slaver to somebody who lived the rest of their life without slavery, but without necessarily giving up the values that that society was built on. So that is what I specialize in and study. So, all right. This one is a quick question. Whenever it comes out, will you read Winds of Winter? I would absolutely love to read Winds of Winter if it ever comes out. I will admit I'm less hopeful now than I've been in a long time about Winds of Winter coming out. I still try to maintain my attitude of every year believing it's coming out this year for real this time. So far, I've been wrong every single time I've believed that, which has been like 8 times now or so, probably more. But I certainly would love to read it when it comes out. I'm not sure I could get away with reading it immediately after it comes out if it does, because that's probably when people will be looking out copyright violation. But I absolutely have every intention of reading it if it does. Somebody asked a very similar question. Yeah, so low key, I'm doing a lot of copyright violation here on YouTube. I think I'm getting away with it in part because I don't monetize, which is a happy coincidence. YouTube's a very poorly moderated website. A lot of it's automatic. A really weird thing is actually I got a copyright flag because YouTube recognized one of the melodies for a song I was singing and connected it to a totally unrelated recording of the folk song that I drew it from. But they don't seem to notice that I'm uploading these, and they don't seem to. In fact, they're selling ads on them. I do want to address this. Yeah, so some of you, if you're recently joining and working through all of my stuff, or if you've gone back to look at some of the older videos, I know some of you do that. I've gotten comments from people who do that. You may notice there are ads on my videos. Unfortunately, I have no control over that. So YouTube a couple years ago changed its terms of service so that any channel of a sufficient size can have ads automatically added to it without me having any say. They do this because Neo, but YouTube is like a combined video platform and social media, and because they take advantage of something called network effects. That is, if I leave YouTube and start uploading somewhere else, it's way harder for me to reach what's now a fairly large audience. I'd have to work really hard to get like diminishing results because a lot of people in my audience just, watch me because it's convenient because I'm on YouTube. The fact that I and every other person who makes videos on YouTube am sort of trapped here because this is the default platform for uploading videos means that they can make the service worse in an effort to maximize return on shareholder investment. That is, get as much revenue as possible. And one of the ways that they make the service worse to do this is by maximizing the number of ads you have to watch. So I am very sorry that you have to watch ads, and I wish there was something I could do about it, but unfortunately I can't. All right, I'm going to spend just a minute scrolling. So this question asks, where did Texas Tyrells come from? So I always saw them more as being South Carolina Tyrells. But yeah, they one of the things I think that's distinctive about my series that I get a lot of comments on is particularly using this very 1800s coded like elite Southern drawl for the Tyrells. I've seen people compare the voice I use for Mace Tyrell to Foghorn Leghorn, which is not far off. And where that came from is actually me reading one of the books that George read for research. It's a book called A Distant Mirror by Barbara Tuchman. It's a sort of pop history, but a really good one of the 14th century in medieval Europe. And it focuses on medieval France. And I read this years ago. I read this before I started this audiobook project. But one of the things that Barbara Tuchman mentions is that France, medieval France, 14th century France, was the center of chivalry in medieval Europe. It was the height of medieval knightly, lordly values, and that this sort of made them admired across the continent. And I was also at the same time reading a book about slaveholders and gender. You see, I go way back with this. It was called a book called Within the Plantation Household by Elizabeth Fox Genovese. And one of the things that she brought up is that when you think about big planter class, that is large slaveholders in their houses, we tend to think about Gone with the Wind, that sort of really elaborate, ornate, luxurious interior and decoration. And she said, that stuff was really uncommon. Most plantation houses were a lot more sort of rough around the edges, not so fancy. I promise this is going somewhere, not so fancy. She said the people who really lived like Gone with the Wind were very limited. Maybe the elites in South Carolina, the really big rice and cotton planters who would call themselves the chivalry, because they saw themselves as living a sort of antiquated courtly life. So those two things, and then encountering Highgarden in A Song of Ice and Fire, which is depicted exactly like Barbara Tuchman depicts medieval France, as the height of chivalry, as the height of courtliness, as the height of chivalric values, the height of basically Westerosi values. And so I just made a sort of mental connection. All right, the South Carolina chivalry, Highgarden's in the South. They're the height of chivalry. They're just like Barbara Tuchman's France. And so I decided to start doing what I saw as like South Carolina gentry accents for the Tyrells. I am not, I appreciate your compliment about having consistent regional accents, but my regional accents are not always consistent. I will often like default to some form of British received pronunciation or something like that, just for the sake of keeping it mixed up. Because the initial thing that had me doing American accents was just knowing I can't do a million variations of British accents. But I wanted the characters to sound distinct and easily identifiable in a scene. So that is why you've got what you call the Texas Tyrells. All right. I am scrolling more questions. Oh, this is an interesting one. What are a few of your favorite films? And is Heat by Michael Mann one of them, with a sort of hopeful smiley emoticon? Let me think about this. What are my favorite movies? Heat by Michael Mann is terrific. Really great movie. I could watch that. I could watch that endlessly. I love. It did sort of break Al Pacino because now he only ever does that as his performance. Ugh. But I love Heat, but I wouldn't put it as like one of my favorites. My favorite movie is a film called Harakiri from I think 1962. Yes, it is from 1962. Directed by Masaki Kobayashi. It is a samurai period piece where it opens up in the middle of Edo, Japan, under the rule of the shogun, and it says, we've had peace in Japan for decades, so all the samurai are out of work, or at least a lot of them are. We've got all these masterless ronin wandering around, and some have even taken to going to the great houses of remaining daimyos and asking to commit harakiri honorably in their forecourts rather than living in poverty and shame. They do this in part because they think they'll get a handout or offered a place in the retainer as a retainer to the house. And the movie opens with this grizzled old Ronin going up and making such a request at the home at the estate of this daimyo, and then telling his story and why he's there. And it is just so gorgeous, beautiful, heartbreaking, so precisely done and balletic in its staging. And oh, it's so good. I'm not going to spoil anything about it, but that is my favorite movie. I also really love Goodfellas. Goodfellas, I mean, I know it's like a freshman dorm room poster movie, but it is, oh, it's so good. It's a movie about friendship and a movie about what it means to value your friends over your family, over the law, over human decency. And also, your friends will kill you in an instant if you come between them and their money. That's what it's about. And it's so good and so funny and so upsetting. And that's another one that I could just watch an unlimited number of times. I'm going to move on to another question here. Did I do it? Wait. Yeah. Any theories I completely dismiss, like a Song of Ice and Fire theories, I presume. Yes. And that would be any theory that I don't feel plays to the themes in the series. So an example of this, I would say, is Tyrion is a Targaryen. Now, I mean, there's some evidence for this. There's some evidence that Tyrion is going to ride one of the dragons, that he'll be the third head of the dragon. He had dragon dreams as a little boy. His King Aerys II was in some way inappropriate with his mother. The book, if I remember right, leaves it ambiguous whether it was harassment or whether it was something much worse. But a lot of people think, oh, maybe the Mad King assaulted Tyrion's mother, Joanna Lannister, I think her name is. And so Tyrion's a secret target. And that's why Tywin hates him. I don't think this is true because it just thematically doesn't make any sense for Tyrion to be a secret Targaryen. Tyrion's whole arc is centered on his relationship with his dad. His horrible, poisonous relationship with his dad. And at this point in the series, a major question of his arc, now that he's taken sort of a dark turn, is Tyrion going to be his father's son? With all that implies. In A Feast for Crows, they do a good job setting that up. Actually, they set it up They set it up early. I mean, but we get explicit drops like when Tyrion kills his father. Tywin is sitting there with a crossbow in his gut, and he goes, like, you are no son of mine. And Tyrion says something like, that's where you're wrong. I think I'm just you writ small. In A Feast for Crows, Jenna Lannister says that Tyrion is Tywin's son, that she told him that, and he got furious at her and wouldn't speak to her, I think. And the question that we're left with Tyrion is, oh my God, is he going to be his father's son? Is he going to be cruel, vengeful, brutal, totally amoral? Because in A Dance with Dragons, it kind of seems like he's headed in that direction after the horrible stuff he experiences in A Storm of Swords. So we have to know, is he going to become a monster? A real monster, which is what Tywin was, even though people see Tyrion as the monster. Is Tyrion going to embrace being the monster, just like the Richard III ass Tyrion in the Arya Winds of Winter preview chapter? Is he going to embrace being ruthless and cruel and evil, or is he going to rise above that and become a good person again, and maybe a better person than he was at the start of the books? Is he going to be one of the people who fights evil once it really is a black and white struggle against the forces of death? So if Tyrion isn't really Tywin's son, it's kind of an easy out. Maybe not for me, who, thinks like, well, I mean, if you're adopted, your adoptive dad is still your dad, right? But I'm a 21st century person. Westerosi people place a great deal of stock on blood. That's a major theme in the series. And so if Tyrion finds out that he doesn't have Tywin's blood in his veins, then it's like, oh, easy. I'm not my father's son. I'm some other guy. I'm a dragon, whatever. And so I don't think that Tyrion is a secret Targaryen, because I think it would undermine what is a really beautiful and stirring character arc. Okay, another question. Did I make a backup of my Song of Ice and Fire videos in case my channel ever gets striked? You are right. The risk is there. Something I'm thinking about doing as I get back into the swing of things is creating a Twitter account with the same handle as my YouTube channel. And if that happens, look for that. I don't see myself setting up the channel in the next couple of days, but check Twitter under the same name as my channel, and I might use that as some way to get things going back up. I might just, like, if I get struck from YouTube, which to me would sort of mark kind of an end of this project, I could, share Dropbox links or something. I do have backup files of all the recordings. I should think about that more later in the future. Okay, so after finishing The Hobbit, will I cover the rest of the Lord of the Rings books? That is a very big thing to promise. I'm not entirely sure. I'm leaning towards probably not. I really like The Lord of the Rings. I think it's a great series. I love Tolkien. I love The Hobbit too. I really like The Hobbit. But the series doesn't just doesn't grab me in the same way that A Song of Ice and Fire does, which is nothing. It's no reflection on the quality of the series, but I don't. Also, the adaptation of the series that exists, the film adaptation, is so iconic, and I have watched it so many times. It's hard for me to imagine my take on it. This actually, like, when I was getting back into publishing recordings just last week, I was really sort of agonizing over what to do with Gollum, because I really couldn't imagine another way that he would talk other than Andy Serkis. And so I did end up sort of doing an Andy Serkis impression. I tried to put like a spin on it, but it was Andy Serkis. And it's hard for me to imagine doing anything else with Lord of the Rings characters who are so, I think, well adapted. Though people who are bigger fans of the books might have quibbles with them that I don't necessarily share. It's very different from like me watching the Game of Thrones TV series and Roose Bolton shows up and he looks like Vladimir Putin and he talks with like a deep, normal voice. And I'm like, that's not Roose Bolton. That's not how he sounds or looks. You know what I mean? So I think probably not. And I'm frankly, for a lot of people asking questions about next series to read, I'm hesitant to promise anything right now because that's a long way away. Especially at the relatively slow pace that I'm going to be going at for the foreseeable future. All right, moving on. I'm gonna pick one at random here. Just scrolling. I see comments that your narrations are bad because fantasy has to be read in a British accent. What did that say? I think it's great, especially since George is American and all. What do you think about those comments? Okay, so not everybody likes what I do, and that's fine. I think that you get the occasional haters, and I think you know, like, what am I going to do? Yell at them? I'm giving it for free. They're giving their opinion for free. Whatever. I think that I like the approach that I took to the series. I stand by it. I even stand by Brooklyn Brienne, my most controversial choice that I've gotten the most negative comments on. Every now and then I get a weird negative comment. If you are one of the people who has asked whether I feed my cats, yes, I feed my cats. They're just loud. That's how cats are. Somebody accused me of abusing my cat in one of the comments, which is a little unusual. But you know, I just it's no skin off my back if somebody doesn't like the choice that I made. There are, I think, other free isn't there a guy now, like another guy who's doing what I did on YouTube, like going chapter by chapter, uploading videos. I could swear there is another guy, right? I'm checking the live chat. Is there another guy? I don't know if the live chat is actually. Oh, yes, right. The guy, I see him on my front page of YouTube sometime. Last seen a horse. Yeah. So there's another guy doing it. So if people don't like it, you know, they can watch those. Maybe they'll like them more. I don't know what Last Seen a Horse does. I should check out his videos. I bet they're great. All right. I don't really know how YouTube is like organizing these questions. Seem to be a little random. Whoa. Okay, so this question, I think, all right. So Dunkin' Egg audiobooks, I've got good news for you. Dylan Nash, asker of this question, they are all on my channel. I uploaded audiobooks of all three Dunkin' Eggs. Those were really fun. They are, I loved recording them. Yeah, so check them out if you haven't. I'm very proud of those Dunkin' Egg recordings. Another show question. Opinion on House of the Dragon. I feel like it's slowly headed toward the same course as Game of Thrones. Yeah, I don't like House of the Dragon. I think that they made a couple. All right, so first off, when I heard that they were adapting The Dance of Dragons, which is a novella in its original form of the rogue prince or the princess and the queen, or its passage in Fire and Blood, where it's like, I don't know, 200 pages, whatever. It's a little short book. I thought, what's the point? That's not, there's not, I mean, none of the characters are sympathetic. I mean, the characters can be complicated, I guess, but they're all pretty despicable. And I also think that's kind of the point as it exists in the series. Now, I know that George has like published blogs and stuff where he complains about adaptation choices in a dance in House of the Dragon. I'm not going to address those or even think about them. It upsets me that he even thinks that's important, frankly. But I think that the story of the Dance of the Dragons is just a little supplement to the theme of feudalism being squalid and miserable and awful. The Dance of the Dragons is two incest mutants fighting each other with medieval fighter jets and killing tens of thousands of innocent people in the process, destroying cities, torpedoing a continent's economy, torturing people, executing people, destroying the law for self-interested reasons. It's just a mess. The Dance of the Dragons is a mess. Nobody comes out of it looking good, for good reason, because George is setting up with that story Danny and Aegon, or Fagon, as people call him, or young Griff. He's setting that up to remind us that, oh, I'm a special incest mutant. My blood is special. I belong on the throne is not a good reason to kill people. And that is what the series is to me. So to make like I don't know how many seasons, hours long adaptation, I thought would be pointless because these are all despicable people. Of course they are. They're medieval rulers. And then the show came on and they did something that, from basically the get-go, that I thought, oh, this is solving the problem in the worst way. They made all the characters too sympathetic. They're all too likable. What's her name? Allison? Is it Allison and Rhaenyra? Sorry, it's been a while. I'm going to assume it's Allison Hightower. If I'm wrong, please, tear me apart in the live chat. But Allison and Rhaenyra are too likable. They're absolutely despicable in the book, as they should be. But in the show, Alicent, right? Now, Alicent is really likable. Rhaenyra is really likable. Rhaenyra is way too likable, but everybody is. Like, nobody should have a sympathetic reason for doing this. And oh my God, the knife and the prophecy shit and so every time there's a fucking dragon on screen, it's awesome. The design for Vhagar is awesome. It's a terrifying Godzilla monster. I love that. Every time you're seeing screaming people on fire, it's awesome. I love that. But it should be all that. Like, it should be an incredibly punishing thing where vile claimants to the throne are just burning people willy-nilly because they think it's worth it so that they can sit on a pointy chair. But the show is too, I don't know. The thing about Rhaenyra in the books that George actually takes great pains to highlight is her cause is not feminist. I think that A Song of Ice and Fire is a very feminist series. It is full of critiques of the patriarchy. In fact, if you think about like the book is just full of it's like a 5,000 page critique of patriarchy. It's one of the main themes. But Rhaenyra's war is not feminist. You can't be a feminist queen. You just can't, because being a queen means extracting labor from peasants used at the point of a sword or a dragon in this case. There's no feminism when you do that. But the show the show got confused. The show thinks you can be a feminist queen, but you just can't. And I think that's the thing. And I watch it and I'm like, why are all these Targaryens reluctant to go to war? Their whole thing is fire and blood. What are they, nice? People aren't nice in that position. And I just want to say, if any of you commenters think that I have a problem with feminism, I am probably so radical in my politics that it would horrify you to hear me outline my views on gender. But I think that the show fails to be feminist because it doesn't address the fact that royalty is not feminist. Monarchy and feudalism are not feminist. This is something in the books when Rhaenyra takes power and she's like the queen, she is totally fine with male heirs taking precedence over female heirs. And she's right to be fine because you can't have feudalism without patriarchy. So I think that House of the Dragon really, I think that it does something similar to what Game of Thrones did, which is it fails to understand the themes. And I think that that's, I mean, I don't know if it's really unfortunate because I'm not nearly so invested in Fire and Blood as I am in, as I was in A Song of Ice and Fire for real. But yeah, I think it's a mess. All right. I've got a lot of questions to scroll through, so give me just a minute. Okay. Do you play D&D, Dungeons and Dragons? Yes, actually, I'll be joining up with my group. Not DMing that group. My dear friend Brent is the one who got me a signed copy of A Feast for Crows. He does delightful voices, and I cheer him on always. I recently DM'd, last year I DM'd a game of Curse of Strahd, and it was all right. Hey, here's some advice to any dungeon masters who are watching, because I know that some of you have asked for voice acting tips. Here's a tip for you based on DMing Curse of Strahd. Do not tell your player characters something is terrifying. The Curse of Strahd book text is full of descriptions to read to players where it says something is terrifying. Show, don't tell. That's my advice. I really would love to do a homebrew campaign where the story, I have like vague ideas for a story. And I think it would be a lot of fun, but as also it's so much work. I love Dungeons and Dragons. I think it's extremely fun. It is a great excuse for me to do silly accents and voices in mixed company, which I don't often have. So I love doing it. Love playing it. Dungeons and Dragons is great. I also think that it does depend on the group. I mean, I think it's something that you really should be playing with your friends. I can't imagine playing with strangers. But yeah, I play and love Dungeons and Dragons. Okay. Are you excited about the upcoming Dunk and Egg show, given how HBO keeps butchering George's work? I'm not really excited for the Dunk and Egg show. In fact, so I should have said this earlier when talking about House of the Dragon. My commitment is I'm not watching any more of that stuff. I need HBO to start getting diminishing returns for their A Song of Ice and Fire cinematic universe bullshit, so that maybe George will be convinced that that he can't stake his legacy on a fucking cinematic universe. I'm in public with my face showing, so I'm not so. All right, I'm gonna say some things about where I think George's head is at, and I'm probably totally wrong. So take, huge grain of salt. What, I haven't met the guy. I'm not his friend. I think what George has or has had for a while is like ADHD symptoms on a $1 billion scale. He's really anxious about finishing his magnum opus because so much is staked on it. I mean, it has people like me calling it the greatest fantasy series of all time, and people who matter calling it the greatest fantasy series of all time. That's a lot of pressure. And I think that something that's happened is George's intentions with the series have changed. I'm sure a lot of you have read his original outline for the series, which is wildly different from how the series ended up going, because he is a gardener. He plants seeds and he lets them grow as they will. He lets the story surprise him. I think his intentions have changed. I think he's not sure how to end it. I think maybe even his view of the world has changed. And he's not sure how to bring everything together. I don't think it's just a storytelling not problem. I think it's him trying to figure out what he wants to do that's a problem. And that's a lot of pressure when you're one of the best-selling authors ever, when your series made one of the biggest TV shows ever. And I think that he's distracting himself. I know that when having I wrote a paper for a conference recently, and before I had to submit that paper, when I was doing final edits, before I did my final edits, I cleaned my apartment. I'm sure some of you have done something similar. It was a great productive thing to do, but it was also a distraction from me doing the work I needed to do. I think for George, writing scripts or executive producing or flying out to Belfast or whatever to meet the cast and tour the Red Keep set, which does look awesome on House of the Dragon, I will freely admit. I think that's him doing ADHD symptoms. Why do I keep saying sitcoms? I think it's him doing ADHD symptoms. He's like, oh, well, this is something I could be doing. It's productive. I don't have to sit there at the computer and stare at the word, I don't know, Bran at a blank page and torment myself. But I'm increasingly worried that he thinks that he's found an out, which is a TV series cinematic universe, which he is the sort of daddy of. And that he is sort of thinking that he can devote his efforts to that, which will be more concrete, which will be produced, which lots of other people are relied upon to produce rather than the main series itself. I could be totally wrong. But when I saw him post a blog where he complained about some nondescript Targaryen missing from House of the Dragon, I thought, I was worried that he thinks that. And so I'm doing my part, which is I'm not watching any more of that crap. If HBO gets diminishing returns, they're going to stop asking for more A Song of Ice and Fire shows. George has all the money in the world. He doesn't need the HBO dump trucks full of cash. And maybe this will make him realize that, it's the books that are his legacy and his greatness. So, no, I'm not excited. And no, I will not be watching it. Let's see. Other questions. Ice and Fire. This is not a question, but I am going to address it. I just want Walter Frey to win in the end. I think this is a bold opinion. I have a couple things to say to that. One, of course, is, Valar Morghulis. All men must die. Walter Frey has got to go in the end. But I do think that Big Walder is going to end up in charge of House Frey at the end. Big Walder, who's currently up at Winterfell right now, and who definitely killed little Walter in that last Theon chapter. I think that he's going to end up at the top. I think he's going to be, the next generation's little nasty little schemer guy. And I am rooting for Big Walder. Big Walder's, kind of awesome. He's not disgusting like Ramsay and Little Walder are. And he's clearly got a good head on his shoulders. I mean, He murdered his own cousin and then used it as an opportunity to sow discord between the Manderleys and the Freys. I think that is I think that rocks, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. All right, let's see other questions. Why are the questions organized like this? Do I think George needs a successor to finish his books? No. I don't think that. I want George's books. I don't want the Expanse guys or the ghost writers he used with Fire and Blood or A World of Ice and Fire to finish the books. Those won't be the same. I want the author whose work I love to finish it. And I honestly I think I'd rather have nothing at all than have somebody else finish the series. It's cliche, but it really is like a journey rather than the destination thing. Of course, I want to know what happens on the frozen lake. Of course, I want to see what happens when Dany gets back to Meereen. But I don't want it if it's not from George, because it's his work, it's his project, it's his magnum opus. I certainly don't want to see like Brandon Sanderson or write them or something like that. So that is so no, I really want George to write them, and if not, I'm not I'm not interested. Scrolling through the questions randomly now. There's a lot of questions. What is your favorite voice to do? I don't have an answer to this question, I think. There are quite a few I find very fun and enjoyable to do, and like got excited when I saw them coming up in the chapter. And because you all seem to really like it when I was reading live, I will do these voices as I name the characters. So there's a bunch. I really like doing a Charles Dance impression for my Tywin Lannister. He's such a nasty and cold sort of person, but his dialogue is very well written, and it's very crisp, and it's a great pleasure to read him when he's coldly cutting someone off, when he's speaking with icy courtesy, when he's yelling at Tyrion. And he's just an incredibly fun character. His dialogue is so great, and it's very fun to just sort of chew the scenery as him and do a sort of a Charles Dance impression. I like doing all three of the surviving Greyjoy brothers. The Greyjoy chapters are really fun for me to record. Were really fun for me to record, and I'm really looking forward to the chance to do more. I love Victarion as a character, and I just felt very, I don't know, like keyed in to him with the voice that I chose. This sort of very low pitched, blunt. You can just tell this guy has rocks for brains when he speaks. Even if he sounds tough and strong, there's no there. If he shakes his head, you'll hear the lint rattling around his empty skull. I love doing that Victarion voice. Like every line is very fun to read as Victarion. It's a little harder on my throat, but like Aeron, it's another like very scenery, chewy sort of thing. with him, constantly, we come from the sea, and therefore we are wet, and wetness is holiness. Like, Aaron's great because he's also just sort of a preposterous character, which I really just enjoy reading it and doing and just going wild with it. Like in some of those chapters where I'm reading Aaron, I'm like practically like shouting about how like a king will rise to rule us, not of the green lands, and and so on and so forth. But again, not easy on the voice. Euron is incredibly fun for me. It's just fun to do villains. Like villains are just, they're fun. I mean, I have actor friends. They like playing bad guys, and Euron is just so fucking evil and he loves it. And he's always got some sort of hideous blasphemy planned. Oh, something monstrous which he will just enjoy. And, just trying to do something that's just like smoothly demonic and very obviously evil is incredibly fun. Speaking of, I really enjoyed one of my favorite scenes to record was Roose Bolton's conversation with Theon in A Dance with Dragons. Roose is a very fun character, but of course he is just so evil. And there's something about, and I don't know if the effect will be diminished if you see my face, because I feel like the disembodied voice is potentially more chilling, but the sort of mute, blunt register in which he speaks while describing all sorts of horrible things that he's done, rape, murder, torture, cruelty towards his son, is something that is just incredibly delightful and fun to record. Doing big conference room scenes is fun too. Like it's a fun challenge to jump between characters, to do Barristan to the Shave Pate to Strong Belwas to Simon Strike Back to Grey Worm to Daenerys back to Barristan. Really fun. I really like doing those. All right. I think I like doing all the voices. I will say that voices like Sansa's are actually like one of the hardest for me to record. I really need my voice to be at good stamina because uh, to voice like a teenage girl, I pitch my voice a little higher, but because she's not like a comical character, I don't want to do like a shrieky Monty Python and drag voice. So trying to make her voice sound realistic when I'm pitching it like very high can be difficult over long periods of dialogue, or when she's switching back and forth with somebody who's a little more gravelly, like Littlefinger, or just very different in timbre and texture in general. So that can be challenging. Let me see what other questions we've got here. Ha! This is a This is an interesting question. Blood Meridian audiobook. Now, Blood Meridian is a great novel. Really, really good. I'm a huge fan of Blood Meridian. I've only also read The Road by Cormac McCarthy, but I should really read some of his other stuff. I don't think Blood Meridian would be super suited to my talents or skill, or I don't really think it's meant to be read in the style that I read it. I think, for example, like the way he doesn't use punctuation marks, the way he's very sparse with not punctuation marks, quotation marks for dialogue, the way he's very sparse with punctuation, with commas, for example. I think it's very much meant to be read to yourself. I don't think that it would really benefit much from the audiobook sort of treatment. I'm sure there are audiobooks out there. And the person who asked this about Blood Meridian, Bobby De Freude, you're no doubt familiar with that one sentence in Blood Meridian, right? Like the one where the Comanche are bearing down on the filibusterers, and there's like a 500-word sentence, and it just doesn't end. I'm not confident in my ability to read that sentence. That's a hell of a sentence. So I don't think Blood Meridian is really in the cards for me. Okay. Moving on. Wait, what's going on with my mouse? Next question. I don't know if it popped up. There we go. Would you consider doing Game of Thrones reaction videos to other creators? Fantasy Haven just stopped a 44-minute every fray explain video, for example, or the Theory Iceberg videos. So something that I mentioned earlier is I'm not actually a big YouTuber. I don't actually spend a lot of time on here, so I'm not actually. So I guess I'm a part of the A Song of Ice and Fire YouTube community, but I'm not really familiar with most of its members. I have read a few blogs about A Song of Ice and Fire. I mentioned Port Quentin earlier, who I really love, but I don't really watch a lot of other videos. And sorry about that. I'm not quite sure where I cut off, but I guess the thing is, I don't really. I'm enjoying this Q&A a lot, but I don't really see myself doing a lot of content other than audiobook chapters, theory videos, or even just stuff where I talk about what I think about the series and what I like. That's not really something that excites me, the thought of doing that. So I don't really see myself doing things like reaction videos, for example. All right. Whoops, nope, that's not the questions chat. YouTube could make this a little more intuitive, I'd gotta say. Um, all right, here's another non-A Song of Ice and Fire question, which I can answer. Favorite video games after Morrowind, obviously. Is Morrowind one of those Elder Scrolls games? That's like the really good Elder Scrolls game, right? I think. But my favorite video games I have I think right now I've got like a top three for games from like the last 15 years. Elden Ring, easily. Uh, Fallout New Vegas, and Disco Elysium. Elden Ring, not just because George R. R. Martin contributed to, I assume it's mostly the lore about the demigods for anyone who's played Elden Ring in here. I assume that's what George had the heaviest hand in because there's so many George hallmarks in there. The naming conventions, the incest, the good intentions going tragically, horribly wrong. But you know, all of the Dark Souls games, Miyazaki's whole deal draws very heavily from George R. R. Martin. But that's not just why I love it. I think it's visually so beautiful. Walking around in that decaying world is just stunning. And one of the things that game has that a lot of games don't seem to is like really serious art direction, like thinking about things like perspective, composition, color in a really sophisticated and thoughtful way, such that there are just so many sights in that game that are overawing and beautiful. I find the story very beautiful and affecting, and the fact that it is basically told through environmental cues and item descriptions is really cool. I think that really takes advantage of the video game medium in a really exciting way. Fallout New Vegas, I love the setting. I love the humor. I love the really well drawn characters. But the thing about Fallout New Vegas that so many games that claim to offer you moral choice don't have is in Fallout New Vegas, you're asked to pick between all these factions vying for post-apocalyptic New Vegas. And other than Caesar's Legion, who are the bad guys, I mean, undeniably, like you gotta be a bad guy to support the slavers. Other than Caesar's Legion, if you're picking between factions, you can't just go, okay, here's the good choice, here's the not good choice. In fact, the game doesn't even give you any cues to say, direct cues to say, here's who you should side with. I mean, this is the good guy ending, this is the neutral ending, and this is the evil ending. Instead, if you want to pick between the New California Republic and Mr. House and independent New Vegas, you really have to like look into yourself and decide like, well, what do I think is right? What trade-offs am I willing to tolerate? And it's so rare the kind of game that offers supposed moral choice where you actually have to question your own ethics and morality. And so I think that's really awesome. And Disco Elysium is just the best written game I have ever encountered. It is so funny. It is so. All right, I'm seeing some live chat on Caesar's Legion. I gotta address this. But the plan was never to keep being slavers; it was to merge cultures. Caesar misunderstands Hegel. This is not how Hegelian dialectics work, is that you have one faction and another faction and they fight and they are changed. Caesar's whole plan is really just a tribute to his own ego. He I think that on some level he believes he's changing the world for the good, but changing the world for the good and glorifying himself are the same thing to him. And I do not see, and in fact, if you side with the Legion, as I've done only once, I've played the game like 20 times, and I've only sided with the Legion once. Hegel is great, by the way, whoever commented that they hate Hegel. Without Hegel, we wouldn't have Karl Marx. And I give him lots of credit for that. Anyway, if you play as the Legion, I mean, they keep doing what they're doing if they conquer Vegas. All right, so Disco Elysium, it's just beautifully written, so funny, so heart-wrenching at the same time. I just had my jaw on the floor playing it. Like, I don't know if any of you have watched Twin Peaks, but I just remember like watching Twin Peaks a lot. I just had like my jaw on the floor and I couldn't stop myself from like laughing and just like just laughing with delight and sort of ecstasy. And Disco Elysium is so like that. Like I unbelievable what they achieve. All right, I'm gonna move on from my video game question and let's see, what else have we got? What themes and ideas in A Song of Ice and Fire interest you the most? So this is a good question, and I need to think about it. I do think, off the top of my head, immediately, gender is a big one. I think that the series is so good at showing the sort of the follies of gender-based inequality and oppression, but also I think does a very good job of showing what it's like to live in those. We don't get the perspective of any working class women. Well, the working class per se doesn't really exist in a medieval setting. We don't get any small folk women as POVs, which, because the series is very focused on the wealthy, which is not a problem, but just a thing. However, we get a lot of perspectives of women who live in the midst of patriarchy, and their experiences vary widely, but generally it's a pretty negative experience. Cersei takes the most poisonous possible takeaway, which is that in fact women are inferior, but she's not like them because she's more like a man, which she does through like weird violent sexual role play and just through her own sort of way of viewing herself in her relation to other women. Catelyn tries to be the best lady possible and live up to standards that are impossible to meet. And I think that is a really great way of looking at how arbitrary gender norms and relations, well, they're not arbitrary, they're meant to support feudalism, but looking at how oppressive gender norms and relations pull people in different directions and place impossible expectations on them. With Brienne, we see the way that patriarchy just sort of, to take a quote from another A Song of Ice and Fire essayist whose name I forget, but his blog is called the At Sea Journal. Brienne's plot sort of shows how patriarchy gets you coming and going. By that he means in Westerosi society, women are weak, they're dumb, they're inferior. Those are what the dominant values say they are. They're physically weak, which makes them inferior. They are morally and mentally weak, which means that they should be below men. Well, Brienne embodies masculine virtues. She is strong. She's courageous. She defends the innocent. Like she like Dunk is the perfect knight. And so why does everybody have a problem with her? Because that's not appropriate for a woman. You're supposed to be weak and stupid and passive, which is justification for men to rule over you. But God forbid you should embody masculine virtues, because then you're creating gender trouble, and then you're disgusting and ugly and blah, blah, blah. And I think that is, I think that, those plot lines are really great explorations of the way that arbitrary gender norms affect people. I also am often inclined to defend George's depictions of sexual violence from people who critique them as being gratuitous and wrong, because George gets that when you have a society where men are at the top and rule is done by violence, then you're going to see sexual violence as a normal fact of life. And I think that he does a really good job of showing how all of the sexual violence in A Song of Ice and Fire is a byproduct of giving men with swords well, it's not all of it, but a major thing is that, for example, in the story that Chiswick tells about going to an inn with the mountain and some of the mountain's men, they do horrible, hideous things, and these are the guys who are entrusted with enforcing rules and the law and moral norms at the edge of a sword. So gender, big theme that I really like in A Song of Ice and Fire. I also I like the class theme a lot. But of course, this plays to my politics. My politics are significantly to the left of George R.R. Martin's, who's a boomer liberal. But he is very concerned with the sort of cruelty of the class system in A Song of Ice and Fire. I really like that. To go to a completely different kind of zone, love magic coming back. I love when magic appears in the series. I think that George is so good because he's a great horror writer, and magic is always horrifying. I think the scene like where Gendry where and they see Dondarrion come out, and he looks like a reanimated corpse, and Gendry's all "Mother have mercy" when he sees him, and then then his sword catches on fire, and the narration says Arya heard Gendry whisper a prayer. Like that just like hits like a ton of bricks every time, and I just love it. Another theme and ideas. I similarly like the idea, just in terms of a fantasy world of magic being so costly. I think that is really great. I think I'm going to ramble if I stay on this question too long, so I'm going to move on to another. What do you think of Jon killing Dany in the series? So I can imagine a possibility where something kind of like that happens in the books, but it's not. But in the show, I hated it with all my heart. I hated everything they did with Daenerys in the final season, and let me explain why. So I may have mentioned this earlier. There's a lot of people in here, so you might not have heard me describe this earlier. So apologize if you are hearing the same. Apologies if you are hearing this again. Daenerys is, I think, definitely going to have a dark turn in the book series. And the reason she's going to have that is because she thinks that her special blood means that she should be on the Iron Throne. That's it's incompatible with her desire to liberate people. You can't do both at the same time. And eventually, that's what's going to lead to her brutally killing Aegon or Fagon or Young Griff and lots of other people as well, and taking a real villainous turn. Though I think that there will be room for her to have some sort of redemption in fighting the forces of darkness and death are very real. In the show was made by, and I'm getting political again. The show was made by very wealthy centrists, who are sort of liberal, but not left wing. And they decided that Daenerys would be evil because she wants to end oppression too much. She wants to break the wheel of oppression, but she wants it too much, which turns her into Dragon Hitler. The most offensive moment in the entire last season, by the way, for me, was Tyrion going on the little monologue where he's like, first she came for the child crucifying slavers, and I said nothing because I was not a child crucifying slaver. You know, like that poem about the Holocaust. First they came for the Jews, and I said nothing because I was not Jewish. That is so fucking offensive to me. Like, first of all, indirect reference of the indirect reference to the poetry of the Holocaust in the context of A Song of Ice and Fire. Chill out, guys. That's like how that first X-Men movie fucking opens at Auschwitz. That's offensive. Like, don't use real. But also, like, killing the child crucifying slavers is not the first sign that she's going to be evil. What that is a sign that she will do terrible things to people who she thinks deserve it. We've already seen her do it to somebody who doesn't deserve it, which is Miri Mazdur in the first book, who was right. I mean, she was right to kill Khal Drogo, or to put him in a impossible coma, and frankly to give Dany an abortion that she didn't want. Miri Mazdur was right. She was going to give birth to an evil, murdering conqueror. That she had to put a stop to that. And Dany burns her alive because what she sees is Miri Mazdur betrays her, which is horrible. It's a horrible thing to do as far as Dany is concerned. And then she murders the child crucifying slavers because she does horrible things to people she thinks deserves it. The problem is her compass for who deserves it is not always right. We've seen it point at people who, frankly, like, yeah, I mean, it wasn't nice to crucify them, but maybe they should have thought of that before they crucified 140 kids or whatever. But we also see her do it to people who definitely don't deserve it. And that's going to be that sort of dark turn that occurs. In the show, she just wants to end oppression too much and becomes Dragon Hitler. And then, Jon kills her and perfectly replicates domestic abuse logic. Like, I love you, baby. I really don't want to hurt you, but you're making me hurt you. I'm sorry. I don't want to be doing this, but you're crazy. I've got to hurt you. That is fucking, no, thank you. I do not like that. Not when it is built up the way that it is. Not when it is so clumsily, horribly done. Not when it's followed by Drogon melting the themes. There's a strong chance maybe it will be Jon who kills Dany in the books. Maybe. But it's not going to be like that. And it's not going to be for those reasons. So that's what I think of Jon killing Dany in the show. All right. Moving on. I'm going to answer this as I keep scrolling questions to see. How do you think Jamie will escape / make a deal with Lady Stoneheart? I really, I don't know why I picked this one because I don't really have any idea. I think Brienne will be involved. Maybe Brienne will, break him out and try and help somehow. Maybe there's somebody else who can like ride to the rescue, though I can't think of anyone. It's not going to be like Bonifer Hasty. So I really don't know. Your guess is truly as good as mine. Now here's a question that I can really ramble a lot about. Favorite non A Song of Ice and Fire fantasy series? Probably The Dark Tower by Stephen King. I really think that Stephen King is one of the better fantasy writers out there. I know he's a horror writer primarily, but he, as far as mass market, The Dark Tower is just such a amazing setting. The characters are so great. Dark Tower. Now, there are many parts of the Dark Tower that I would love to read, character voices that I would love to come up with. The last minute or so of the stream has been really broken. I am sorry about that. I hope it's fixed now. So with both The Stand and The Dark Tower, to answer you, Carol Funk, there are two very similar problems that prevent me from wanting to do that. And they are called Odetta Walker and Mother Abigail. George R.R. Martin, or not George R.R. Martin, Stephen King. Stephen King is a boomer liberal. And I mean that in the best possible sense. He grew up in, the mid-century United States. It imbued him with a really strong sense of justice and a really strong sense of like what's right and wrong. And also he's clearly got a really sophisticated historical consciousness. And this is one of the reasons why racism comes up in so many of his books. It's very prominently featured in It, which is his best work. It comes up in The Dark, comes up in The Stand. But also, he writes Black characters in a really cringeworthy way, in a very boomer lib way. He loves to have magical Black people who sort of are Christ-like in taking on the sins of America and the world, like Mother Abigail, or like, what's his name in The Green Mile, the one who says, "I'm tired, boss." And honestly, like, I imagine if I've got right-wing fans in the comments, they're not gonna like hearing this. I don't want to do a stereotypical Black lady voice, so I can't do a book that contains Mother Abigail or Odetta Walker. Yes, John Coffey, that's the guy from The Green Mile. Thank you. Another great book and great movie. It's, and I don't say this about Stephen King to condemn him. It's something that is just a part of his work. He is so firmly his belief that like cosmic evil and racism are the same thing. I think it's great. But unfortunately, I just can't read it. I maybe in some distant future Wizard and Glass from The Dark Tower, but I don't know. Just reading like the flashback from Wizard and Glass seems weird, but man, Wizard and Glass is my favorite book in the Dark Tower series, and I think it's like Stephen King's second best book. Oh man, Wizard and Glass is so good. I should reread it. Do you mind having right-wing fans? That's an interesting question. please keep it to yourself in the comments on my videos. I am the stuff I post on my videos is not political, except in the sense that you can read politics into George R. R. Martin's writing. You can certainly read feminist politics into Clan of the Cave Bear because it's explicitly feminist. But I don't mind having right-wing fans, but I don't like any of your views. I hope that doesn't offend, but I am vehemently opposed to right-wing politics in my non-audiobook life. So, I'm happy to have any fan, but don't be posting your politics on my YouTube. All right. So let's look at another one of these questions threads. What do your professional colleagues and fellow book nerds think of George R. R. Martin as an author now that they've read/heard him a bit? So, the craziest, weirdest thing is that I actually met somebody in my department who had come across my YouTube channel before they ever met me, which was a pretty fun, weird thing. But I will say that he's generally pretty well regarded among the people I know who have read him. I have a couple friends who couldn't make it through A Dance with Dragons because they just felt sort of bogged down with the characters, and I can sort of see that. But generally, like, a lot of people I know are big fans of his. I wish that the YouTube would eliminate questions I have already answered so that I could more easily read through these. Thoughts on Stannis the Manus and Jon Snow's resurrection. Okay, so I don't really have thoughts on Jon's resurrection. That's a huge. I've got no clue what's going to go on there. I mean, he's got to come back, right? Right, but I got no clue. We've never gotten a POV who's come back from the dead, so that's going to be really interesting. But I do have thoughts on Stannis. I really like Stannis. I think he's a great character. I think that he's doomed. I brought this up earlier, but I think that he is going to sacrifice his own daughter, but he's going to do it when the wall falls to try and protect the world, and he's going to fail, and he's going to damn himself in the process. But there are so many things that I like about Stannis. One is that he is stealthily one of the funniest characters. Like his bottomless contempt for almost everybody around him is so fun to me. Like, one of my favorite gags in the series is when Janos Slynt is like trying to butter him up, and Stannis is telling him off, and somebody says like, well, who better to command the Black Cloaks than a man who once commanded the Gold? And Stannis just sort of dryly deadpans, anyone, I should think, even the cook. It's just so funny. I also like that he grows a lot as a character. Like, I think he's got some of the most dramatic character development for a non-POV character. Because I think he over time has become like more merciful, more thoughtful, more considerate. And I really like that about him. And I really love his interactions with John. I love them as similar characters, but also foils to each other. I really like the sort of torment he subjects John to with all of the constant temptation to abandon his vows. I really like seeing him like hold court among his knightly vassals and figure out strategy. Like it is really fun. I love I love Stannis. But as I mentioned earlier, I don't really have a who should be king view because my view is nobody. That's one of the reasons why Varys' little monologue at the end of A Dance with Dragons is so funny. Because like he's like, we've made a perfect prince. He's a great guy. He's terrific. He's will be a perfect king. And then what? So there's not going to be a good king at the end. I think there's a very strong chance overall that the White Walkers sort of do a concentrated equivalent of the Black Death to Westeros and sort of smash the material basis of feudalism. And so something new has to rise up. But I don't know. I don't know where George the Boomer liberal is going to take it. Here's a fun question. You do the quote spicy scenes with so much, I'm imagining a very pregnant pause here, passion. How does it ever feel awkward recording or listening to the playback on those? Yes, and yes. And it's also awkward when people I know listen to them. Um, but it was recording the sex scenes in the series was a matter of, I don't know, commitment. I'd committed to everything else, and I thought that it was what was I going to do? Phone it in during the sex scenes? What was I going to do? Do like a Chewbacca voice so that nobody had to hear me like do a drag voice of somebody orgasming. Now, the person who just commented on the scene with Littlefinger and Lysa. Now that was a fun to record because that scene is hilarious. That one I felt actually significantly less awkward about because it is so self-evidently ridiculous. Okay, so I'm getting some. So, but like how two friends of mine told me they listened to my Eris Oakheart POV chapter in the car together. And that I'll admit that made me like blush because I'm just like imagining two guys I'm like close friends with listening to me fucking moan in my impression of a Dornish accent. And yeah, I mean it's awkward, but life is full of awkwardness. So I don't really get out of sorts with it. Here's a question that was in the live chat. Wait, I'm just going to read it out loud because I don't know how to put it in the question box. But what's your favorite badass quote from the books? Mine is Manderley. Oh, this is a good one. So young, said Wyman Manderley, though mayhaps it was a blessing. Had he lived, he would have grown up to be a Frey. That's a great quote. Claudio is back. He might hop up in my lap in the next couple minutes. I mean, there are so many good ones. The one that comes immediately to mind is, all right, chat, help me out here. Who's the Castellan at Storm's End in A Clash of Kings? I'm counting on you guys. Courtney Penrose. Yes, thank you. Yes, so when Courtney Penrose says to Stannis, "Bring on your storm, my lord, and recall when you do the name of this castle." That kicks ass. I love that line so much. It's such a shame he gets ghost pushed out of tower after delivering that fire. Yes, for anyone just tuning in, this is Claudio, the person that you hear on the he's not a person, he's a cat, the cat that you hear on the audiobook chapters. He is still around. He's gotten, I don't know, he's been a little more well behaved when I've been recording chapters recently. And yes, he is a very pretty cat and very beautiful. And he does let me rub his belly like this. So he's a very sweet guy. Um, Now, that quote from Carlon down there from Euron is great, though I would rank that as an evil quote more than a badass quote, just because like he's bragging about being a monster rather than like being tough, you know. But yes, Euron's monologue about prayers is one of my favorite in the books. As I've said this before, but when George R. R. Martin wants to write like a villain, ooh, Dance with Me Then is a great one. There was a great comment on my video for the Game of Thrones prologue where somebody pointed out that the whole prologue is very like subversive in that Waymar Royce turns out to have good instincts in wanting to track the wildlings further and figure out what the hell's going on. And it turns out he's quite brave and has a lot of valor and is willing to face down one of the others single-handedly, just in the name of his duty. And I think it's so awesome when he says, "Dance with me then," and draws his sword. Yes, great stuff. So yeah, the prayer monologue from Euron is just really awesome. When George R. R. Martin wants to write a villain, not a morally gray character, not a complicated character who has some good things, but just a guy who's fucking evil as hell and he loves it and makes no apologies. He is so good at writing a bad guy. And Euron's prayer monologue really shows that off. So those I'm seeing some great quotes in the live chat here. And thank you to Nelson Rosa doing the evil Euron laugh was one thing that I really enjoyed doing. That was a slight edit on my part because I think the text just said he laughed, but I could not resist it. This is a good point from Carl Karsnark here that yeah, bad equals cool, cool equals good, bad equals good. Yeah, I mean, I see no problem with that logic. So I'm seeing some people bring up parent questions and theories about whose parent is whose. I remember somebody in the comments asking me about whether John is a Shara's son. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, with Tyrion being a secret Targaryen, I think twists have got to serve the themes. And John not being Ned's son, but being Lyanna's son and being loved and desired as they wanted a kid and they were happy to have a kid rather than being the unwanted byblow of like an affair of his father is, I think, really important to where his character is going. So I do think that Ned is Rhaegar and Lyanna's kid. I think I've been here for 2.5 hours now. So I think that I am going to wrap this up in the next couple minutes. But I think I will answer just one more question before I go. I'm glad that Claudio came in the last few minutes here so that he could, so that I could show him off to all of you, and you could get the face reveal that you really wanted, which is Claudio's face. All right, one more question. Okay, so here's a big theme question I like. And for those of you who were sticking with me when I talked about New Vegas, I like this one because it forces me to not just think about George's intentions, but my own sort of beliefs about the world that I take to the series. And I think, inevitably, like my audiobooks of them. Do you think sacrificing the few to save many is something you agree with? How do you feel about the topic? The Red Woman's fires and many other themes in the book. Well, I mean, that's an easy one. No, I'm kidding. So it depends. I don't think that. So in a Storm of Swords, Davos frees Edric Storm when he realizes that the Red Woman is going to kill him in an effort to serve Stannis and empower Stannis. Stannis, who she believes is the Messiah, Azor Ahai, and Stannis says, "What's the life of one bastard boy against the whole world?" And Davos says, "Everything." And it's a very powerful, beautiful moment, and it convinces Stannis. But I wonder, does George actually believe that? Because I don't know. If every target, because like when King Robert wants to send an assassin to kill Daenerys and who is pregnant, Ned objects on similar grounds. You can't kill a child, Robert. I won't stand for this. I won't be party to it. I quit, if you will, if you do. But is Robert right? Like, I mean, if we look at the show, killing Daenerys would have solved a whole lot of problems and saved a whole lot of lives, wouldn't it? I guess ultimately the real answer is I and very few people are in or should be in a position where I can or should be making those sorts of choices. And I think what George really thinks is that, and it's something that I am in a contradictory, inconsistent way inclined to agree with, is he thinks that it's an injustice to have an individual in the position of deciding to kill a few to save many, if that makes sense. Even before you get to the question of whether that's okay, you have to get to the question of, wait, how are you the person deciding this? And is it right for you to be deciding? And I think that when we look at the series is a really important theme for considering this question, which I do think is a big theme in the book, this sort of, I guess, trolley problem of whether it's okay to do bad in the name of greater good. And so, yeah. So I think I'm going to close it off there. This was very, very fun for me. It was really great to hear from all of you and get the chance to answer your questions. But I have been at it for 2.5 hours now, and I think that I've got to call it a night because I am right back to work Sunday morning. At this stage in my grad school, work has me doing 6-day weeks. This was so fun. Thank you all for watching and for asking your questions. I'm sorry that I was so long-winded. I couldn't get to all of them in the time that we were here. But look for another chapter of The Hobbit next Saturday. And I'm going to try and get back to recording the last few chapters of Clan of the Cave Bear soon. So if you are one of the few people on my channel who's into those Clan of the Cave Bear readings, keep your eyes peeled for those because those will be around in the next couple weeks as well. Thank you all for watching. This was really great. All right. Have a good night, y'all.